When Linda Williams barred my nephew from the neighborhood pool, I barely knew her last name. 8 months later, I had uncovered her complete financial fraud operation and documented every corrupt transaction. This transformation from naive retiree to financial investigator occurred because Linda made one fatal error. She targeted a former securities lawyer who had spent 2 decades dismantling white-collar schemes and possessed unlimited time after losing his beloved wife. The calm before the storm Tuesday morning, 6:30 a.m. I stood at my front door wearing pajamas, holding my steaming coffee mug, confronting 2 bewildered police officers and 1 self-satisfied woman dressed in pristine tennis attire. The aroma of fresh coffee mingling with Linda's excessive floral perfume should have warned me this transcended simple community regulations. What would you do if your HOA board member tried to weaponize law enforcement against you? Share your worst neighborhood association experience below. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. I wonder how many viewers are currently battling their own local dictators. I'm Robert Chen, and 10 months ago, I believed I'd discovered paradise. Maple Ridge Commons, 135 immaculate homes, constructed between 2018 and 2020, featuring a stunning $350,000 community pool that gleamed like crystal in the dawn light. I purchased the premium corner property overlooking that pool for $780,000, when similar houses sold for $680,000. Every dollar seemed worthwhile, particularly after witnessing my wife Jennifer's 3-year cancer battle. Jennifer passed away last September. Our shared home of 24 years felt like a monument to memories. I relocated to Maple Ridge seeking a fresh beginning. After retiring from securities law following 2 decades of exposing corporate fraud, I expected tranquility and peace. Each morning, I'd sit in my kitchen with coffee, watching sunrise illuminate the pool's surface while listening to early swimmers create rhythmic splashes. This became my meditation, exactly what my grief therapist had prescribed. That's when I first observed her. Linda Williams, 52 years old, insurance broker, HOA board secretary, and owner of the showcase residence anchoring our development. Always impeccably dressed in designer workout clothes, maintaining perfect auburn highlights, perpetually clutching her omnipresent folder like she managed a multinational corporation rather than a suburban homeowners association. Married to County Commissioner Tom Williams, which meant she possessed influential connections and ensured everyone remembered it. Paradise lost. The initial months passed blissfully free of Linda's interference. I maintained privacy, followed every regulation meticulously, and gradually began feeling alive again. Then summer arrived, bringing my nephew, Carlos. Carlos is 17, my sister's son from Denver. Brilliant student, bound for computer science at university, and the closest thing to family I have left. Jennifer and I never had children, too career-focused initially, then too consumed with her treatment. Carlos spent his summer with me, working at the neighborhood electronics store and providing companionship to his lonely uncle. The conflict began on a Thursday in July. Carlos had invited 2 co-workers for an afternoon swim. Respectful teenagers who actually said, "Thank you, Mr. Chen," without prompting. We enjoyed perhaps 90 minutes of youthful laughter and occasional splashing. Then Linda materialized poolside with her clipboard, like some community enforcement specter. The chlorine scent mixed with her overpowering floral perfume created a suffocating atmosphere as she approached our small group. "Excuse me," she announced loudly enough for every pool visitor to hear. "I need guest registration forms for these young men." Guest registration forms? I'd resided there 8 months without hearing about such requirements. "Their family," I explained calmly. "This is Carlos, my nephew, and these are his work friends." Linda's smile could have sliced steel. "Regulations are regulations, Mr. Chen. Auto Association bylaws explicitly state that excessive guest usage, meaning more than 2 visitors per residence weekly, requires advance registration and approved guest documentation." I offered to register the boys as extended family visitors. This seemed perfectly reasonable, but Linda had no interest in reasonable solutions. "No exceptions," she declared, consulting her clipboard like it contained divine commandments. Pool. Access is immediately revoked for Unit 52 pending compliance investigation. The scraping of pool chairs as other residents suddenly became fascinated with their smartphones. The palpable tension of fear. Nobody wanted to become Linda's next victim. Carlos and his friends silently collected their towels, embarrassed and confused. That evening, Linda posted an official notice on the community bulletin board. Pool privileges suspended for Unit 52 pending compliance review. She even made an announcement at the weekly association meeting, emphasizing my failure to follow established procedures with theatrical disappointment that clearly identified who the villain was supposed to be. Sitting in that stuffy community room surrounded by anxious neighbors and the smell of stale coffee, I realized this wasn't about pool regulations. This was about authority, domination, and teaching the newcomer his proper place. Linda had just committed her first mistake. She'd provoked someone who'd spent 20 years confronting bullies who concealed themselves behind legal documents and technical jargon. Time to resurrect some dormant expertise. Escalation and harassment. Linda wasted no time intensifying her campaign. 3 days after the pool incident, I discovered an official letter in my mailbox. Certified delivery, naturally. She'd scheduled a compliance hearing with the association board, providing exactly 48 hours' notice. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday at 7 p.m. Thursday marked Jennifer's birthday. I'd planned to visit her gravesite, perhaps bring those daisies she adored, spend quiet time sharing stories about Carlos, and how proud she'd be of the remarkable young man he'd become. The letter cited multiple violations I'd apparently overlooked. Garbage containers visible from the street, they weren't. Lawn height exceeding 3.5 inches, I'd measured 3.1, and my personal favorite, failure to maintain community standards through proper guest supervision. That evening, I did what competent lawyers do when facing hostile opponents. I studied the fine print, every page of the association documents I'd signed at closing, plus the original community charter. 20 years of securities law teaches you that crucial details hide in boring sections, and Linda had just provided me a blueprint to her vulnerabilities. Buried on page 52 of the charter, I struck gold. Reasonable accommodations shall be provided for family visits and multi-generational household activities. Linda's guest policy directly contradicted the foundational document she claimed to enforce. Even better, her official letter violated multiple procedural requirements: insufficient notice period, failure to specify which regulation was allegedly breached, and scheduling during what any reasonable person would consider emergency family time. The first battle Thursday evening, I entered Linda's dining room. Apparently, we conducted official association business in her personal residence, carrying a manila folder containing every relevant document, highlighted and indexed. Her lavender air freshener was so overwhelming I wondered if she was masking something else. Perhaps corruption has its own distinct odor. The board appeared uncomfortable. Kevin Murphy, the president and recently retired middle school principal, kept shifting nervously. Rosa Martinez, our treasurer and no-nonsense CPA, took notes with the intensity of someone documenting evidence. Linda's husband, Tom, wasn't present, probably wise enough to maintain deniability. Linda opened with a PowerPoint presentation. I'm serious. She had actual slides about preserving community standards and protecting property values. Every third slide contained thinly disguised references to certain residents who don't understand our lifestyle. The sound of her manicured nails tapping the mahogany table created an irritating rhythm, matching her condescending tone perfectly. When she finished her performance, I quietly stood and began arranging documents. Before we proceed, I said, I'd like to address several procedural violations in tonight's hearing format. I methodically outlined how association business couldn't be conducted in a board member's private residence without community notification, how the 48-hour notice violated bylaws requiring 7 days minimum for compliance hearings, how the alleged violations cited in her letter didn't correspond to any specific regulatory language. Kevin Murphy straightened up. Robert, are you saying this hearing lacks validity? I'm saying if we enforce regulations, we should follow them ourselves. I opened my folder and extracted the highlighted charter pages. According to the foundational document we all agreed to honor, reasonable accommodations shall be provided for family visits and multi-generational household activities. My nephew's pool afternoon with 2 friends falls clearly under this protection. Linda's face reddened. That language is obsolete. We've updated. Actually, Linda, the original charter can only be modified through community-wide voting. Has such voting occurred? Silence. Rosa Martinez looked up from her notes and shook her head. Here's where Linda made her critical error. Instead of acknowledging the procedural problems and scheduling a proper hearing, she launched a personal attack. Perhaps Mr. Chen is struggling to adapt to community life after his recent loss. Maybe the stress of learning new regulations is overwhelming. The room fell dead silent. Even Linda's supporters looked uncomfortable. You could hear the air conditioning, cycling in the distance. I gathered my documents slowly, deliberately. Thank you all for your time. I'll be reviewing our community charter more thoroughly. We'll be in touch. The vote was 4-2 to uphold the pool prohibition, with Kevin Murphy and Rosa Martinez dissenting. But something had changed. Linda had revealed her true nature, and the board had glimpsed what they were really dealing with. That night I opened my laptop and began the type of comprehensive investigation I hadn't conducted since my last major securities fraud case. Following: the Money Trail Association formation documents, municipal filings, Linda's insurance business transaction history. Everything was public record if you knew where to search. By 2 a.m., I'd discovered the first thread. Williams Insurance Group had been the exclusive agent during Maple Ridge's construction phase. Exclusive arrangements like that usually involved financial incentives. Time to determine exactly what those incentives had been. Linda's next move came quicker than expected. Within a week, she'd organized what she termed a standards enforcement patrol. 3 residents with clipboards and cameras documenting every minor deviation from association regulations throughout the community. Suddenly, people received violation notices for issues ignored for years. Bicycles stored in garages but visible through windows, decorative flags exceeding the single display limit, holiday decorations still visible in August. But I received special attention. Daily surveillance drives, photographs of my property from multiple angles, printed warnings placed under visitors' windshield wipers. Carlos started joking that Linda was stalking us, but I could see it was affecting him. A 17-year-old shouldn't worry about causing his uncle trouble simply by existing. The harassment campaign was having its intended effect community-wide. Fear spread like infection. Neighbors who used to wave from their driveways suddenly discovered their phones fascinating when I walked past. The division was becoming visible. Newer residents rallying behind Linda's standards, while original homeowners whispered concerns in shopping center parking lots. That's when Rosa Martinez approached me after one of my morning walks. She's a petite woman with iron determination, the type of accountant who could detect discrepancies from across the state. "Robert," she said quietly, glancing around like we were planning espionage, "we need to discuss something. There are financial irregularities in this association that don't make sense." While Linda played security patrol, I was doing what securities lawyers do best, following the money. The investigation deepens. I'd installed discrete security cameras around my property, perfectly legal in Colorado, and began documenting Linda's patrol schedule. Every surveillance drive, every photograph, every intimidation tactic, all time-stamped and recorded. Here's a legal principle most people don't understand. Association enforcement procedures require written warnings before penalties can be imposed. Linda's verbal harassment and immediate pool prohibition violated due process requirements under state law. Key insight: document everything, because association board members can be held personally liable for procedural violations. I also began quietly connecting with Kevin Murphy and Rosa Martinez. I wasn't the first resident to experience Linda's special brand of community leadership. Kevin shared stories about families who'd relocated rather than endure her harassment. Rosa hinted at financial irregularities but needed time to compile evidence. The pool incident that changed everything occurred on a Friday afternoon. Carlos and his friends had waited until designated family hours to use the pool, everything by the book. They were quietly enjoying the water when Linda appeared. with her clipboard and 2 patrol volunteers like some association SWAT team. "Leave the pool immediately," she announced, her voice carrying across the water. "Unit 52 remains under pool privilege suspension." The boys complied without argument. Carlos had coached them about not escalating conflicts, but Linda wasn't satisfied with compliance. She followed them to my house, her entourage in tow, voices escalating with each step. By the time they reached my driveway, half the neighborhood was watching from windows. Linda was in full theatrical mode, gesturing wildly and discussing certain types of people who don't understand community standards. Here's where my legal training activated. Instead of engaging in a shouting match, I retrieved my phone and started recording. "Linda," I said calmly, "the association's legal obligation is providing equal access to community amenities for all residents in good standing. Can you cite the specific bylaw justifying ongoing pool privilege suspension?" She continued ranting, but now she was doing it on camera. "This transcends pool regulations, Mr. Chen. This is about people who embrace our community values versus people who don't." 3 neighbors emerged from their houses, clearly disturbed by Linda's tone and the implications of her statements. Mrs. Kim from across the street shook her head in disgust. The Washingtons, a young African-American couple who'd moved in last spring, exchanged knowing looks. "If you can't control your guests," Linda continued, oblivious to the growing audience, "perhaps this community isn't suitable for you." I emailed the recording to the association board that evening with a formal complaint about harassment and discriminatory enforcement. The email was professional, detailed, and documented Linda's behavior pattern with timestamps and witness statements. The smoking gun. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Linda's defense was predictable. She was protecting the community from disruptive influences and property value threats. When the vote came on formal censure, it was 3-3 with Linda abstaining. No action taken, but something crucial had shifted. After the meeting, Rosa Martinez slipped me a manila envelope. "Financial documents," she whispered. "Compare the construction contracts versus actual amenity costs. Then tell me your thoughts." That night, I spread those documents across my dining room table and felt the familiar excitement of spotting inconsistencies that would unravel everything. The numbers told a story Linda definitely didn't want anyone to read. The original association budget showed $1,900,000 allocated for community amenities, pool, landscaping, community center, playground, but the actual construction invoices Rosa had preserved showed costs of only $150,000. $650,000 had vanished. Here's the beautiful part. Rosa had saved bank statements showing large, irregular deposits in Linda's business accounts during the construction phase. Amounts that coincidentally matched the timing of association payments to the developer. Williams Insurance Group had received referral bonuses and sales incentives that were 300% above normal insurance commission rates. But the real smoking gun was an email Linda thought she'd deleted, where she explicitly discussed profit-sharing arrangements with Sunset Development for inflated amenity budgets that would be absorbed by association dues over time. Financial reality check. Developers often inflate community amenity costs and split profits with insiders who control the approval process. Always demand actual construction invoices, not just budget projections, before approving association special assessments. This wasn't about pool access anymore. This was systematic financial fraud that had been draining our community for 3 years. Every resident had overpaid for substandard amenities, and we continued overpaying through inflated association dues designed to cover the missing money. "There's more," Rosa said grimly when we met again. "The monthly landscaping contract, pool maintenance, even the snow removal service. They're all overpriced by 25–35%, and Linda receives kickbacks from every vendor." The pattern was clear. Linda's aggressive rule enforcement wasn't about maintaining standards. It was preventing scrutiny of financial irregularities making her wealthy. Her harassment campaign against me had escalated because my securities law background made me the one person in the community capable of unraveling her scheme. "Why didn't you bring this to the board earlier?" I asked. Rosa sighed. "Because, Linda, controls the board. Kevin is honest but outnumbered. Everyone else either fears her or benefits from her connections. I needed someone with legal expertise to understand what we were examining. The irony was delicious. Linda's attempts to silence me had actually motivated me to investigate the exact financial corruption she was trying to conceal. Her harassment campaign was evidence of obstruction, and her discriminatory enforcement patterns showed deliberate targeting of anyone who might question her authority. Building the case. As a securities lawyer, I'd seen this type of fraud dozens of times. Developers and their inside conspirators inflating costs, skimming profits, then using aggressive tactics to prevent discovery. The difference was that now I wasn't being paid to investigate. This was personal. "What's our next move?" Rosa asked. I looked at the evidence spread across my table. Email admissions of profit sharing, bank records showing suspicious deposits, construction invoices proving cost inflation, a 3-year pattern of financial irregularities totaling over $650,000. "We're going to give the community exactly what Linda's been trying to prevent," I said. "Complete financial transparency. Every resident deserves to know where their money went and who profited from overcharging them. And if she tries to stop us," I smiled, feeling more like my former lawyer self than I had since Jennifer died, "then she'll be adding obstruction of justice to fraud and embezzlement charges." Linda picked the wrong retired securities attorney to mess with. Time to build a case that would hold up in criminal court. The final confrontation, building a criminal. Fraud case requires 3 elements: evidence, allies, and patience. 20 years of securities law had perfected my skills in all 3 areas. Step 1. Assemble the team. Rosa Martinez brought financial access and insider knowledge. Kevin Murphy provided board legitimacy and moral authority. I contributed 2 decades of securities law expertise and intimate knowledge of how fraud schemes operate. Our first strategy session occurred in my living room on a Tuesday evening. Security cameras ensured privacy, while we spread documents across my coffee table like generals planning a campaign. The aroma of Rosa's homemade enchiladas mixed with the tension in the room. Nothing builds conspiracy quite like comfort food. "Here's what we're dealing with," I explained, pointing to the financial timeline I'd constructed. "This isn't random theft. It's sophisticated long-term embezzlement with 3 revenue streams: inflated construction costs, overpriced service contracts, and developer kickbacks disguised as insurance commissions." Kevin Murphy shook his head in disbelief. $650,000. That's over $5,000 per household. "Actually," Rosa corrected, "it's worse. The ongoing overcharges mean we're being robbed monthly through inflated dues and service contracts." Legal principle. Association board members have fiduciary duty to protect community financial interests, and residents have legal rights to detailed financial records and independent audits. If your association won't provide transparent financial documentation, that's probably because they're hiding something worth discovering. Our strategy was multi-pronged: criminal referral to the district attorney's office for fraud and embezzlement, civil action to recover stolen funds plus damages, association governance reform to prevent future corruption, and community education so residents understood their rights and could protect themselves. The key was building an airtight case before Linda realized what we were doing. We needed to document everything, preserve all evidence, and prepare for her inevitable retaliation. I taught Rosa how to use professional case management software to organize financial documents. Every suspicious transaction, every overpriced contract, every questionable deposit, all cross-referenced and time-stamped with supporting documentation. Meanwhile, Carlos had become our social media intelligence officer. His digital native skills were invaluable for tracking Linda's online activities and monitoring community sentiment. Linda's social media posts about maintaining standards and problematic residents created a beautiful timeline of harassment that correlated perfectly with my financial discoveries. "Uncle Robert," Carlos said one evening while updating our digital evidence files, "Linda's been posting about you on Facebook almost daily. She's basically documenting her own obstruction case." I retained Michael Chang, a criminal defense attorney specializing in white-collar crime. Not because I needed defense, but because I needed someone who understood prosecution strategies and could help me present evidence in prosecutors' preferred format. "This is actually quite strong," Michael told me after reviewing our evidence package. "Financial fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud. The email admissions alone are prosecutorial gold. Add the pattern of retaliation against whistleblowers, and you have federal charges." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. We filed formal public records requests for all association financial documents, completely legal, entirely within our rights as residents. Linda would either comply, giving us official documentation of the fraud, or obstruct, adding criminal charges to her growing legal problems. Kevin Murphy used his position as president to schedule a special board meeting about financial transparency and community concerns. The agenda was innocuous, but the subtext was clear. We were bringing the fight into the open. I spent evenings preparing presentation materials that would make complex financial fraud accessible to residents without legal or accounting backgrounds, charts showing where their money went, comparisons between what they paid and what they received, simple explanations of their legal rights to financial information. Rosa handled the financial forensics, creating a paper trail that would make prosecutors smile. Every inflated invoice, every suspicious payment, every kickback disguised as legitimate business expense, all documented with professional accounting precision. Meanwhile, I worked on the legal framework. Colorado has strong laws protecting association residents from financial abuse, but most people don't know their rights. I prepared template letters residents could use to demand financial transparency, explained their rights to independent audits, and outlined legal remedies available for fraud victims. The beauty of our strategy was that every action was completely legal and within our rights as residents. Linda could try to retaliate, but she'd be fighting residents exercising legitimate oversight of community finances. Linda's desperation became visible the moment our public records requests reached her desk. Within 48 hours, she'd called an emergency board meeting to propose disruptive resident removal procedures with me as the obvious target. Her false narrative was almost impressive in its audacity. According to Linda, I was a mentally unstable widower using lawyer tricks to harass honest volunteers and threaten community harmony. She actually suggested that my grief over Jennifer's death had made me paranoid and vindictive. The character assassination campaign spread across social media like wildfire. Fake Facebook posts claiming I was planning to sue individual residents, whisper campaigns about my unstable mental state following my wife's death, fear-mongering suggestions that my harassment would result in increased insurance costs for everyone. But Linda's masterstroke was cultural dog whistles, subtle comments about certain residents not fitting community values and the need to maintain our way of life. She never said anything explicitly discriminatory, too smart for that, but the implications were clear to anyone listening. Here's where my legal training paid dividends. Instead of responding to personal attacks, I continued methodical evidence, gathering while documenting every one of Linda's statements. 20 years of securities law had taught me that bullies always escalate when initial tactics fail, and escalation leads to mistakes. The board meeting she called was standing room only. Word had spread about the disruptive resident agenda and everyone wanted to see the showdown. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with industrial coffee created an atmosphere you could cut with a knife. Linda's presentation included a formal proposal to implement disruptive behavior penalties, fines up to $1,500 for residents who undermine community harmony through frivolous complaints or intimidation of volunteers. When she finished, I stood with my manila folder. "Before the board considers any penalties," I said calmly, "I'd like to present some concerns about procedural violations in tonight's meeting format." I methodically outlined how Linda's proposed penalties violated due process requirements under Colorado Property Code, how the emergency meeting violated bylaws requiring 7 days' notice for policy changes, how the disruptive behavior language was unconstitutionally vague and could be used to silence any resident questioning board decisions. More importantly, I continued, opening my folder, I have documented evidence of a 3-year pattern of harassment directed at residents requesting financial transparency. The room went dead quiet as I presented time-stamped documentation of Linda's harassment campaign, her surveillance photography sessions, her intimidation of my visitors, her attempts to weaponize code enforcement against my family gathering. Kevin. Murphy and Rosa Martinez openly supported my position, demonstrating that the board unity Linda counted on was fracturing. 3 other board members looked uncomfortable as they realized they were being recorded making decisions based on personal vendettas rather than community interests. That's when Linda made her critical error. Under pressure and facing exposure, she lost composure. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she snapped. "Mr. Chen is using lawyer intimidation tactics to silence board members trying to protect this community from people who don't understand our standards." I kept recording. Let her dig her own grave. After the meeting where Linda's proposals were voted down 5-2, she cornered me in the parking lot. What she didn't know was that my phone was still recording. "Look, Robert," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Maybe we can work out our differences. The association budget has some flexibility. We could arrange for your pool maintenance to be covered, maybe help with some landscaping costs. If you could just drop these complaints and let the board handle things quietly." Attempted bribery on tape, in front of witnesses. "That's a generous offer, Linda," I replied carefully. "But I think financial transparency benefits the entire community, not just individual residents." Her mask slipped completely. "If you don't back off, you'll regret it. This community has ways of dealing with troublemakers, and my husband has friends in county government who don't appreciate residents who waste municipal resources with frivolous complaints." Threats also on tape. The false police report. The next morning, Linda filed a false police report claiming I had threatened her during our parking lot conversation. She timed the complaint perfectly, right as I was having my morning coffee, ensuring maximum neighborhood visibility when patrol cars arrived. But Linda had finally made the mistake I'd been waiting for. She'd weaponized law enforcement based on a demonstrably false complaint, and I had audio evidence proving it. When officers arrived at my door at 6 a.m., I was ready with my phone, my recording of the previous night's conversation, and 20 years of experience dealing with people who thought connections could override evidence. "Officers," I said calmly, "I believe you're here about a complaint from Linda Williams. Before we proceed, I'd like you to hear the actual conversation she's complaining about." Linda's overconfidence had just handed me federal charges for filing false police reports and obstruction of justice. The police officers listened to my recording with expressions that shifted from skepticism to disbelief to barely contained anger. "Nothing irritates law enforcement quite like having their resources weaponized for personal vendettas. Ma'am," Officer Johnson told Linda when they confronted her, "filing false reports is a criminal offense. We strongly advise you to reconsider any future complaints unless you have actual evidence of criminal activity." But Linda was beyond rational thought. Facing exposure of her financial crimes and collapse of her community power base, she launched full scorched earth mode. Her final desperation play involved filing a formal complaint with the county attorney's office, claiming I was threatening community safety and using legal intimidation to undermine legitimate governance. She attempted to freeze association accounts to prevent me from accessing financial records, citing ongoing legal threats as justification. When that failed, she called for emergency votes of no confidence against Kevin Murphy and Rosa Martinez, claiming they'd been compromised by the troublemaker. Her goal was installing a compliant board before criminal investigation could proceed. The community was fracturing along predictable lines. Newer residents, intimidated by potential legal costs and believing authority should be respected, rallied behind Linda's narrative about protecting stability. Original homeowners, families who'd experienced her harassment firsthand, and anyone concerned about financial transparency supported our transparency efforts. But the majority just wanted the conflict to end, regardless of who was right. Media attention and justice. That's when local media attention transformed our neighborhood drama into a public interest story. Channel 5 News picked up Carlos's viral livestream footage and began investigating association power abuse in suburban communities. Suddenly, our little Maple Ridge drama was representing a broader pattern of unchecked authority in residential governance. While Linda was busy with damage control interviews, I was filing a comprehensive criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. 20 years of securities law had taught me exactly how prosecutors think, and I presented our evidence in their preferred format: timeline, financial documentation, recorded admissions, pattern of obstruction. The DA's white-collar crime unit assigned Detective Patricia Wong to investigate. Within 48 hours, she'd issued subpoenas for all association financial records, developer contracts, and Linda's personal banking information going back 5 years. "This is substantial," Detective Wong told me during our interview. "Financial, fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and now obstruction of justice. We're looking at potential federal charges." Linda's panic was visible to the entire community. For the first time, she faced consequences beyond neighborhood politics. Her insurance license was under review. Her husband's county council position was generating negative publicity. Criminal defense attorneys don't come cheap, and her illegal profits were about to be frozen as evidence. But cornered animals are dangerous, and Linda had one last card to play: property damage and final retaliation. Property damage. My pool equipment mysteriously malfunctioned, $3,500 in damage to pumps and filtration systems. Security cameras were tampered with, though not before capturing footage of late-night visitors to my property. My home office window was broken by a stray golf ball that somehow traveled 250 yards from the nearest course. The harassment campaign expanded to my professional reputation. Organized phone calls to my former law firm, claiming I was having a mental breakdown and making threats against community members, letters to the state bar suggesting I was using my law license to intimidate private citizens. Linda's final power play was calling for an emergency vote to dissolve the current association board and install a professional management company, coincidentally owned by one of her insurance associates. But she'd made a critical error. The evidence avalanche was now too substantial to contain. Security footage captured her late-night property sabotage. Phone records documented the coordinated harassment campaign. Most damaging, Detective Wong's investigation had uncovered additional kickback schemes involving landscaping, pool maintenance, and snow removal contracts. The community education campaign we launched was working. 53 residents signed a petition supporting financial transparency. Local news coverage had educated homeowners about their rights to association financial information. Property law blogs and association reform websites were citing our case as a model for community organizing. Regional television news picked up the story as an example of suburban corruption, featuring interviews with association law specialists, who explained residents' rights and remedies. Carlos's documentation of Linda's behavior had spread far beyond our local community, inspiring other association residents to demand accountability. The viral aspect added pressure Linda hadn't anticipated. Her behavior was now public record, archived on social media and news websites. Any future insurance clients could Google her name and find detailed documentation of harassment, financial fraud, and abuse of authority. As Detective Wong's investigation expanded to involve federal mail fraud charges, Linda realized her comfortable suburban scheme was collapsing. The final showdown, the mandatory community meeting required by state law when criminal investigations involve association finances, was scheduled for the following Saturday. All stakeholders would be present: residents, media, law enforcement, Linda's criminal defense attorney, and a very prepared securities lawyer with nothing left to lose and a community to protect. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp tension of a courtroom before a verdict. Maple Ridge Elementary School Gymnasium. Our community center was too small for the crowd this story had attracted. 97 of our 135 households showed up, along with Channel 5 News, Detective Patricia Wong, Linda's criminal defense attorney, and enough social media live streams to crash the school's Wi-Fi. The smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with nervous sweat and anticipation. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows faced a table where Linda sat with her lawyer, looking like she'd aged a decade in the past month. Rosa, Kevin, and I anchored the other side, our evidence boxes stacked like legal artillery. Linda's opening move was predictable: play the victim. Her attorney had coached her well. She spoke in measured tones about being persecuted for volunteering, to protect community standards and harassed by a man who couldn't accept legitimate authority. Mr. Chen has used his legal background to intimidate honest volunteers, she said, avoiding eye contact with cameras. This witch hunt is costing the community thousands in legal fees and destroying the harmony we've worked so hard to build. She painted herself as a dedicated public servant, targeted by an unstable widower using lawyer tricks to settle personal grudges. It was a masterful performance if you ignored the mountain of evidence sitting 3 feet away. When Linda finished, I stood and connected my laptop to the school's projector system. 20 years of courtroom presentations had taught me that visual evidence trumps emotional appeals every time. Before we discuss personality conflicts, I began, let's examine some numbers. The first slide showed our community's original construction budget, $900,000 for amenities. The second slide showed actual construction costs, $250,000. The difference, $650,000, appeared in red. This represents money our community paid for amenities we never received, I explained. That's over $5,000 per household that vanished during construction. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Numbers don't lie, and these numbers were telling a story Linda definitely didn't want heard. The next slides documented ongoing overcharges. Pool maintenance contracts 35% above market rate. Landscaping services costing triple comparable providers. Snow removal contracts for a Colorado community that averages 3 snow days per decade. Every month, your association dues include inflated charges for substandard services, I continued. Over 3 years, this represents additional theft of approximately $180,000. But the smoking gun was the email evidence. Rosa had preserved Linda's electronic confession, and now it filled the gymnasium screen in 24-point font. Revised community amenity pricing, confidential, and profit-sharing arrangements for inflated amenity budgets. You could hear a pin drop. Residents were seeing, in Linda's own words, how she'd conspired to steal from the community she claimed to protect. This isn't a personality conflict, I said. This is documented financial fraud. That's when Linda's composure finally shattered. Against her attorney's frantic head-shaking, she stood and began defending herself. Those emails are taken out of context, she shouted. I negotiated the best deals I could for this community. If Robert Chen wasn't so obsessed with destroying me because I enforced pool rules against his nephew, none of this would be an issue. The crowd stirred. She'd just admitted to targeting Carlos based on ethnicity while simultaneously confirming the financial irregularities. I've devoted 3 years of my life to protecting property values and maintaining standards, Linda continued, her voice rising. If that means keeping certain elements from undermining what we've built here, then I make no apologies. The racist undertones were unmistakable now. Phones emerged throughout the crowd recording her meltdown. Carlos, sitting in the front row, shook his head in disgust while live streaming to his thousands of followers. Detective Wong chose that moment to address the crowd. The district attorney's office has filed criminal charges, including fraud, embezzlement, mail fraud, and conspiracy. This is now an active criminal investigation. Linda's attorney physically restrained her from responding, but the damage was done. She'd publicly confessed to financial misconduct while revealing the discriminatory motivations behind her harassment campaign. Community response and victory. The community response was swift and overwhelming. Resident after resident stood to share their own stories of Linda's harassment, financial hardships caused by inflated association dues, families who'd moved away rather than endure her targeting. The Washingtons described receiving violation notices for suspicious gatherings when extended family visited for holidays. Mrs. Kim, the elderly woman from across the street, delivered the final blow. In 70 years, I've never seen anyone work so hard to destroy the sense of community they claim to protect. The standing ovation when I finished our presentation lasted nearly 5 minutes, not for me, but for the truth finally being told and justice finally being served. I didn't move to Maple Ridge to be a lawyer again, I said when the crowd quieted. I moved here to heal. But when someone tries to steal from my community and then harass families for asking questions, they pick the wrong retired securities. Attorney. The mic drop moment Linda had orchestrated, just not the way she'd planned. Justice served 6 months later. Justice had beautiful symmetry. Linda Williams pled guilty to federal fraud charges, agreeing to full restitution plus penalties in exchange for avoiding trial. The final tally: $823,000 in stolen funds, plus interest and legal fees. Her insurance license was permanently revoked, and her husband quietly resigned from county council when his own involvement in the cover-up came to light. Sunset Development faced federal investigation and lost all municipal contracts. 4 other communities discovered similar kickback schemes, turning our local drama into a statewide association reform movement. But the real victory was what we built from the ashes of Linda's corruption. Our new association bylaws require transparent financial reporting, resident oversight committees, and independent audits. No more backroom deals or mysterious budget items. Every expenditure over $750 requires board approval with full community notification. Rosa Martinez was elected president. Kevin Murphy continues as treasurer. I serve as compliance officer, a volunteer position that lets me channel my legal skills into community protection. The recovered funds transformed Maple Ridge from Linda's authoritarian regime into the collaborative community we'd all hoped for. We used $350,000 to eliminate association dues for 3 years. Another $300,000 funded actual improvements, playground upgrades, walking trails, and the community garden that now produces vegetables for the local food bank. The remaining $173,000 established the Jennifer Chen Memorial Scholarship for local students pursuing computer science degrees. Carlos was the first recipient, and watching him accept that award with tears in his eyes reminded me why fighting for justice matters. Jennifer would have loved seeing her memory help other young people reach their dreams. Personal healing and legacy. The personal healing surprised me most. Fighting Linda's corruption had given me purpose beyond grief, a way to channel 20 years of legal experience into protecting people rather than just winning cases. The community meetings that once felt like trials now focus on shared projects and genuine collaboration. Carlos spent his final summer weeks organizing pool parties for neighborhood kids, teaching them to swim and showing them that community spaces belong to everyone. The sound of children laughing in that pool, the same pool Linda had tried to weaponize, became the soundtrack of our victory. Our story spread beyond Maple Ridge. Property law journals featured our case as a model for community organizing. State legislators cited our experience while drafting association reform bills. I started receiving calls from other communities experiencing similar corruption, and helping them felt like the best possible use of my retirement. The ripple effects continue expanding. Real estate agents now inform buyers about association, financial oversight rights. Municipal codes require stricter oversight of community financial management. Most importantly, residents in developments across Colorado know they have power when they organize around facts and law. Linda's harassment had been designed to isolate and intimidate, but it accomplished the opposite. Our community emerged stronger, more connected, and more vigilant about protecting each other from future abuse. The fear she'd cultivated was replaced by the confidence that comes from standing up to bullies and winning. Detective Wong told me our case became a training example for white-collar crime investigations. Most association fraud goes unreported because residents don't know their rights, she explained. Your documentation and presentation made prosecution straightforward. The memorial pool party last month, we held our first annual community pool party, honoring Jennifer's memory and celebrating our journey from authoritarian control to collaborative governance. Families from across Maple Ridge gathered around the pool that had sparked this entire conflict, sharing food, stories, and the satisfaction of justice served. Carlos, now thriving in his computer science program, visited for the celebration. Uncle Robert, he said as we watched neighbors laughing and swimming together, Aunt Jennifer would be so proud of what you built here. He was right. We'd built something Jennifer would have loved, a community based on fairness, transparency, and mutual respect rather than fear and control. Your turn. What's your worst association horror story? Share it in the comments. You might be surprised how many others have similar experiences, and more importantly, you might inspire someone else to stand up for their rights. Remember, you have more power than corrupt officials want you to know. Research your rights, document everything, and don't let anyone bully you out of transparency. Subscribe for more David versus Goliath stories, where everyday people take on corrupt systems and win. Next week, how a retired teacher exposed a municipal tax scam using nothing but public records and determination. Because sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be silent when you know what's right.